On the 20th of June 2023, the world commemorates World Refugee Day as an international day designated by the UN to honor refugees around the globe. It falls each year on the 20th of June and celebrates the strength and courage of people who've been forced to flee their home country to escape conflict or persecution. Why is this day important? It's important because it shines a light on the rights, needs, and dreams of refugees, helping to mobilize political will and resources so that refugees can not only survive but also thrive. I'm getting this from the website of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR.org, and we are going to have that conversation. We'll be joined by two people. One of them is in the studio, the other one is running slightly late. Irene Kinoti is a program officer with Pamoja Trust. Will shortly be joined also by Boniface Odhiambo, who's an economic recovery and development coordinator at the International Rescue Committee. Irene, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you.
We've had conversations with Pamoja Trust before, talking about the plight of the refugees across the globe, and especially those who live in the country and outside of the designated refugee camps. Mm-hmm. So now this year, as we commemorate Hope Away from Home, what does that mean? What's the basic translation of that when the UNHCR says this year's theme is Hope Away from Home?
The main thing that the UNHCR is trying to put forward is the place of inclusion for the refugees and integrating them amongst the local communities, or the host communities as we call the Kenyans, because the only way a person who's away from home can feel in a accepted or in a homely space is when they feel that they are integrated within the neighborhoods that they live in. And with integration comes opportunities such as economic empowerment, comes opportunities such as living in habitable environments. So it's I would use the term pregnant word that carries a lot of creating a space for the refugees to just feel like they are accepted in a country such as Kenya.
Feel like they are accepted.
Yes.
What seems to be implied is that they don't feel accepted. As things stand. Well, look at it this way. Mm-hmm. They are in a camp. Mm-hmm. It's a designated geographical area within the confines of a certain habitation, and it's apart from, maybe any other community that lives nearby. Mm-hmm. So already they have been segregated. Mm-hmm. Now, what are we saying? Are we going to change this segregation? What are we saying? Are we going to move beyond the makeshift dwellings that they have? Are we going to create a habitation that mirrors other habitations that people in communities who are actually Kenyans have? Mm-hmm. What exactly are we saying?
I would like to first of all reference the urban refugees, mm-hmm. those ones who are living in areas such as Nairobi. For people who live in Nairobi and most of the counties, the rise of the Refugee Act of 2021 gave them a lot of opportunities. First, for instance, the Act speaks about the refugees' inclusion in the development processes and also the economic spaces in the country. The Act also speaks about them accessing services, equal rights in equal measure with the Kenyans in terms of accessing facilities and also public institutions. So there is a progressiveness in terms of looking for a solution for the refugees beyond giving them the humanitarian assistance. And if you look at the donor world currently, a lot of work is moving away from giving the refugees humanitarian work to give humanitarian support to giving them self-reliance or mostly self-reliance type of support, where they can be able to get equal opportunities with the people in the different in the specific country.
Could you give an example of this sort of facilitation that you speak of?
Uh-huh. So, for instance, in Nairobi County recently started giving the urban refugees their business permits. Mm-hmm. And this is to allow the refugees begin doing businesses, especially in the informal markets and the different markets that they are they have access to, because data shows that majority of the refugees, especially in the urban areas, are the people who serve us with these informal types of commodities. Along the road, utapata the people who are selling the items are refugees, even in the markets. But then the challenge was these people were not getting spaces in these spaces in the
formal markets.
In the formal markets, and even in the informal markets, because host communities were occupying spaces, and even when the refugees present, the host communities do not really recognize them and do not want to give them the space. But you see, with the county government recognizing them and even making the step to give them business permits, is already creating a space where refugees feel included within these kinds of spaces. And this is not only for the matters to do with business. It also comes to even issues to do with the KRA. You cannot compare the past and currently. Right now, some refugees can actually access their KRA pins. We have some. I think it's mostly a system challenge, because there are refugees that can key in their ID numbers in the system and it runs, but then some of them still have some minor challenges. The same applies also for the NTSA and e-citizen platforms. In anything that majority of the services that Kenyans can access currently, the refugees can also access.
Could you walk us through the sort of documentation that a refugee has that recognizes them as a refugee but also enables them to get these services?
So once a refugee comes in Kenya, you'll come in as an asylum seeker. And you'll have to follow the due process within 30 days so that you can start applying for the refugee ID, because in Kenya, the main document that is recognized for the refugees is the refugee ID. However, the moment you get into Kenya and you start applying for the refugee status, you're given the asylum pass or the temporary pass. With the temporary pass, you can access some services, but then the refugee ID is the one that gives the refugees the access to do majority or get the opportunity to access so many services in the country. But the temporary pass or the asylum pass and the refugee ID are the main documents.
Who processes these documents?
The Department of Refugee Services, DRS.
And they're different from immigration?
Yes, that's different from the migration.
Let's look at numbers. Over 500,000 refugees in Kenya as of 2021. That number may have changed, whether slightly or significantly, with the conflict in Sudan, because we do know that there's been an influx of more after that conflict.
Yeah.
Also, some other numbers, Kenya is second to Ethiopia on the continent for being a source of asylum for these refugees. With the different services across organizations that are provided for refugees, what is the ultimate goal? I know there are several things. There's resettlement, there is, integration, and probably now futurely assimilation into societies where they've sought asylum. But what would be the end goal? To say, when the conflict in the place where you were initially domiciled has come to an end, then we think about you going back? Or is Kenya, for example, is Ethiopia, for example, ready to say, let these individuals who have fled as a result of conflict then get a second home in these countries where they're refugees?
Okay. So maybe I could speak a little bit about the current context. So you'll find that majority of the refugees from Sudan are not coming into Kenya. They are moving to the neighboring countries. What we still have is majority of the Somali people moving into Kenya because of the drought challenge that happened in Africa, especially the northern parts of Africa and part of Kenya. But our Refugee Act does highlight that there are only 3 ways that a refugee can get a sustainable way in which their issue can be resolved. The first one is repatriation. And repatriation is where an individual voluntarily accepts to go back to their home country. The next part is integration, and this is where a lot of focus is being placed on seeing how refugees can be helped to become self-reliant, and that's why we can see a lot of opportunities coming in with matters to do with even financial inclusion. And I know Boniface, when he arrives, he can speak more about what IRC is doing and also the micro-lending opportunities for the refugees, because we know that they've been having challenges in accessing services such as even getting accounts, getting money from banks. Aside from that, we have resettlement, which is, we know that's what majority of the refugees want, being resettled to other countries, especially the Europe countries. So efforts that are being made currently are just around those three aspects, both within the Kenyan government and also the international space.
So, you said the what is preferred is the integration bit, right? So refugees arrive, they get processed, they get integrated within a community that they're living, or resettlement if they are to move in and then they're just resettled. So it goes against that whole concept of having refugee camps. Are we saying that we should do away with refugee camps? What purpose do refugee camps serve in these three things that you've mentioned?
I think refugee camps would serve as an entry point first for the refugees, especially if we have an influx. But ultimately, because I know that the Kenyan government was also trying to do away with the refugee camp, but this discussion has slowed down for some period of time. And maybe it's also because of the high numbers of people that are in these spaces, and and with the hope that a refugee will not live in the country for a long period of time, they'll ultimately, the situation that made them become refugees in the country will cease, and they'll go back to their countries. Because that's also one of the things that that qualifies a the refugee status to cease. If the status that led to you being a refugee comes to an end, you're supposed to go back to your country. So probably the refugee camps play the role of acting as spaces where they can live in temporarily in the country, but ultimately for those who have difficulties or those who do not have the hope of going back to their countries because of instances such as maybe their orientations or the social groupings that they belong to led to their persecution, it means that ultimately they'll have to find a solution in which they'll live in Kenya for a long period of time.
Because that has been the case. Have we seen situations whereby folks who come in as refugees have actually gone back to their countries? Because I know we've seen the others. I mean, seen a couple of stories of children who were born in refugee camps and today are 20 years old. So have we seen the opposite, whereby they've come in for a period of time, and through the process, like you said, because it's supposed to be temporary while things are being sorted out. So have we seen that the process has played out whereby every now and then folks can go back to where they've come from, also I guess depending on the reason why they left the original country.
I don't know whether Boniface would like to take that.
He's just coming.
Oh, he's just...
let the man breathe in.
Okay, yes. I'm not sure about the specific in terms of nationalities, but I'm pretty sure that we have context in which the situations in the different countries have changed. And individuals with the support of their government have been allowed to go back to their countries. But in terms of context-specific nationalities, that one I cannot really point a finger on it.
Okay, it's a good point then to introduce Boniface, who's just joined us. Boniface Odhiambo is Economic Recovery and Development Coordinator at the International Rescue Committee. Good morning, Boniface.
Good morning, Latif.
Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Pole, ulipotea wapi?
Hali ya Nairobi.
Okay.
You need to say no more on that subject.
Yeah, enough said.
Tunajua hiyo Nairobi.
Welcome to the conversation. And you just heard Irene, talking about the various refugees and their status and everything. As you respond to that question, maybe you can quickly just introduce us to the IRC and what the organization does.
Thank you, Latif, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. for International Rescue Committee is an organization that majorly our main role is to support those whom their lives have been shattered either through violence, conflict, or displacement. And majorly IRC have worked in the country since 1992, and we have majorly supported refugees, and our area of operations basically supporting issues of their healthcare, inclusion, working closely with the government, and just to be sure that we promote cohesiveness and providing another life of chance for the refugees. So IRC, through its operation and also working with the different partners, including UNHCR, Pamoja Trust, and other actors, we have been working towards just ensuring that refugees get second chance. And today being the International World Refugee Day, we say that is hope away from home, because the opportunity that it presents is that this is the second home for the refugees who moved into the country. Some of them in the country for over 20 years. And we have also seen some more new arrivals coming to the country due to a result of other factors of climate change. So in talk of refugees, not just the issue of war. There are other reasons as to why people migrate and move to neighboring countries. And like any other person, you'll always want to move where there are better opportunities and where there is hope. And that is why today we speak about hope away from home.
What are you people saying? Let me just throw this issue out there so we can address it. Are you saying that we as Kenyans should accept refugees in our communities, start having them in our neighborhoods, integrating with them, mingling and mixing?
Very true. That's the conversation we should be having, because the fact that we have refugees in the country, or we have them in Kenya, it's not any different with me moving from my local home in Siaya and coming to be in Nairobi. So what the essence means, you need to be live together as neighbors, and you need to also feel the opportunity and also enjoy all the rights like any other human being would want to enjoy. So Kenya as a country has been very hospitable. We have seen also the government of Kenya making deliberate moves through laws and regulations to provide conducive environment for the refugees in the country. So we want to believe that with those progressive milestones that the government is making, and also Kenyans themselves also accepting our neighbors and the refugees who are living amongst them, is the essence that we appreciate the fact that they mean a lot to be part of us, and that's why we need to live together.
Boniface, the truth is, like you said, Kenyans are hospitable people.
Definitely.
Right? There are many people of different nationalities from across the region who are in Kenya, particularly Nairobi and then in the other smaller towns. However, there's profiling. As they live in the community, people say, those guys, they point them out. There's profiling.
Yes.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a bad thing, just to speak to it, because one fact we need to live up to is that just the way we are even in this setup in the studio, we need each other in the conversation. So wherever we have our neighbors and wherever we have those who live amongst us, we contribute towards everybody's well-being in the society. I would want to mention that even within Nairobi city where we live, we find that many refugees are participating in other economic livelihood activities. And remember, when they get money, they'll buy their food stuff from the mama mbogas. They'll also pay rent wherever they need to pay. So in essence, when they do that purchase and contributing to the local economy, ultimately everybody gains. So we will need to accept the fact that having good neighbors and also having the integration with the refugees provides really a broader, benefit to us as neighbors, not just neighbors, but also as a community. It's also good to have a friend. When you have a friend next to you whom you can converse with, when you can chat with, that means you ideally have a unified community. Yeah, and I think the government also, you remember, had the Nyumba Kumi initiative, which we believe has really also come up with a better way of promoting better neighborhoodness, and which I also believe is an essence of just having one united people.
We'll go into a break shortly, and then I know City has a question. But you as Pamoja Trust and IRC, Pamoja, you work very much in the local communities, right? And IRC, you deal with both spectrums. Have you ever engaged host communities to understand what they feel about these people who've moved into their neighborhoods?
Yeah.
What do they say? What do host communities say about these new people?
Okay, so there's a prejudice, we have to say that, because majority of the host communities do believe that the refugees have money, especially when you talk about the Somali refugees and the Sudanese refugees. But over time, as you begin engaging the community, you start breaking that kind of perception and attitude, because some of that information is misconstrued. That's wrongful information. And what we've been doing, especially at the community level, is a lot of sensitization on the Refugee Act, helping the host communities understand that refugee rights are human rights as well, and also reminding them that you're also one step away from also being a refugee. It also depends on the context in which your country is in. So today is Sudan, tomorrow probably it's Kenya, and you'll need to flee to another country and hope that they'll be receptive to you as well. So it's a lot of sensitization, and also telling the community some of these things that the refugees bring on the table. For instance, yesterday we had a session in Kasarani and Githurai communities, and we had a joint sports initiative with the Nairobi County Government Sports Department. And you could clearly see that the refugee groups, football teams, are very strong in terms of skill set. So this is already giving us an opportunity to see that they also bring in skills within the country, and there are also aspects that deal with cultural matters that can reinforce whatever we have as a country, and also what we do at our local levels on a day-to-day.
Irene Kinoti is a program officer with Pamoja Trust, and Boniface Odhiambo is Economic Recovery and Development Coordinator at the International Rescue Committee. Today, the 20th of June, 2023, is World Refugee Day, and the theme for this year is Hope Away from Home. City?
You know, the discussion and the talk about the generosity of Kenyans, if I were not a Kenyan, I would find it almost mythical. I would say, surely can a people be that generous? But it's true, Kenyans are very generous. Kenyans are very accommodating. But it seems that applies to people who are our visitors, people who have come into the country. I wonder whether that applies to fellow Kenyans, because we've had IDPs in this country for the longest possible time. Have those matters been resolved? Here we are resolving matters of people who've come from other countries. And we are certainly looking into how best we can accommodate them. And if we look at the matters of the IDPs that we have in the country, it's because neighbors, not someone else who came from some other country, neighbors are the ones who descended on their neighbors and made life impossible for them to live in the place they had grown up and they had been born in. Have we resolved the IDP issue in Kenya before we start resolving these other issues of other people who have come into our country?
Thank you so much, for that question. I want to look at the context of IDPs, and I think we were heavily affected by the post-election violence, and all of us do appreciate that the government made a lot of efforts, despite a bit a prolonged process of resettling the IDPs. But one fact remains that the issue of IDPs continue to be a recurrent situation, not just because of conflict, but also we have had IDPs as a result of floods, other disasters, which contributes to our own citizens being displaced. So one thing that we appreciate that we have seen a lot of progress, and you also want to concur with me that even the government make deliberate effort to provide both short-term and about long-term initiatives, either could be through shelter or through could be also just getting alternative places where they can settle. But right now it's not very, I don't think that I have very clear understanding, but I presume that most of persons who are affected during post-election violence have gotten been resettled. Probably now we could be talking of the recurrent or the new emerging scenarios where people have been displaced either by floods or the conflict in the war-torn areas. We have had areas of West Pokot, Baringo. We have seen internally displaced persons because of the conflict that is going on there. So one thing that probably we may want to appreciate that humanitarian actors like IRC still have deliberate initiatives to provide support to these populations, and we will continue to work closely with the government just to see that it is resolved. But the issue of IDPs, we may still see them recurring because of the other natural effects or factors that contribute to that.
Okay. You mentioned the government, so I guess that's a good time to bring this question. When you talk about government participation in the refugee process, there's a host country. In this case, use Kenya or Ethiopia as the example. But with the issue of IDPs, with the issue of refugees, we see a lot of involvement by international organizations and non-governmental organizations. What is the role of host governments in the process, in all these processes through which refugees then are taken care of, from registration, protections, status, education, livelihoods, capacity building, resettlement, etc., and then resettlement or reintegration, beyond the agreement of hosts as hosts, beyond using internal mechanisms to push along a particular issue like registration or tax payments, things like this. We see a bulk of the support come from external sources. What is a government's role for the process of bringing in refugees, keeping them there beside the welcoming of parties?
Thank you. We have seen government play a major role. Actually, it's the main key, I can say, responsible entity to support the refugees. First, the issue of laws and regulations. If government doesn't allow and provide guidelines that accept, it's not going to happen. But then you find that the international community that are coming in and other international NGOs, our role is to complement the efforts of the government, because the resources are limited, they are constrained, but working very closely with the government. So we have seen a lot of progress, and I want to mention that we have the Refugee Act 2021 that the government enacted, which is provides a lot of hope that we are moving now towards integration and considering refugees as part of people within our economy. So the Refugee Act 2021, though I know regulations are yet to be passed by the Parliament, the Act is already there, but now the regulations that now will inform every bit of the process. It's looking at providing, allowing refugees to formally get employed and also access, other key documentations that will enhance their inclusion and participate in our economy. So with those progressive laws, that comes in handy. The government also have also worked with the international actors and provided, when you look at the settlements where the refugee are, issues of security, issues of just ensuring that the welfare are well taken care of. We also need to talk about social protection and healthcare. You find that we have, also some of the refugees able to access NHIF, which we believe these are very progressive. If they are being included in our national system and processes, that to us acts as a plus, because government has a voice in promoting that. I know we still have a long way to go, because not all has been achieved as we may want to see that happen. But I know there are also ambitious plan. We initially it was called the Marshall Plan. It's called the Nashiriki Plan, which is looking at now getting out of the camps and now integrating refugees to live among the host communities, which I believe, with the government being part and parcel of that process, already provides a lot of hope and opportunity for us to really achieve the goal of integration and cohesion.
Besides integration, do you think the government of Kenya, because the government of Kenya hosts millions of refugees, it has hosted millions, right? Do you think we should get to a level where we give refugees citizenship status?
I know that's a question to look at, not just at the government, but I know it's also about the international community conversation. But one fact that the role that the government ideally plays is first to consider the fact that the refugees have somewhere to call home. And we know before even they come to the country originally, they originated from their home countries, which we recognize they belong to certain nations. There were efforts and also initiatives to do voluntary repatriation for those who are willing to go back to their country. I think 2015, 2016, which some of the refugees voluntarily went back to their home. But in terms of citizenship, I think that calls for a lot of laws and the conversation that the government and key stakeholders need to have. But we believe more so of the high priority is the opportunity that we accept that they are part of us. We just provide requisite documentation to recognize their presence and allow them to participate in our local economy. To me, I think that's more important.
To do the things that they can do locally.
Than the government and relying on aid, donations and support. But we look at more durable solutions that can make them
the durable solution is making them citizens. So then they feel that they now belong somewhere. You know that thing of being in a neighbor's house, but you have some boundaries. There are things that you can do. They cannot work in our public service. They don't have the necessary documentation. They cannot run for public office. All those things there. But for us to fully integrate them, why not give them citizenship status? Irene?
When you talk about giving them citizen status, I think that's also some of the things that are being thought through when we talk about the integration aspects. But then we have the gap when it comes to the regulations. So post the development of the regulations, maybe we'll get a clear direction on matters to do with even after I'm integrated and I live for almost 30 years in Kenya, what does it mean for me? So looking forward, maybe when we look at the regulations, whatever they'll speak to and how they'll guide us, some of those aspects will be unpacked.
So, I'm imagining a situation, again, like I said, a child is born in a refugee camp and has lived there today, is no longer a child, is 25, 26 years old, because that's the length of some of the camps have been open for that period of time, right? That's all they know. And it's not one story. It's not 50. It's not even 100 stories. It's many, many more like that. So I guess if we are looking at their plight and their situation, would there be some kind of, push to say, let there be some kind of permanency in their lives? Because as long as they've been here is as long as there has been a conflict or an adverse situation in the place where they are coming from. Look, there would be an appetite, I'm almost sure, for some of these folks to want to go back home. But there's something that precludes them from doing that. The conflict is still alive, or even if it's dormant, the chances of it flaring up again are still there. And those reasons would make them leave again. So would there be something where there is a concerted effort to say that even if you have come into host country, Ethiopia, Kenya, as a refugee, because these are groups who are IRC, Pamoja Trust, UNHCR, who are working on policy with these different nations, with member states, to be able to come and say, look, guys, a situation where a refugee lives as a refugee for 26 years is not palatable. Can there be something else that can be done to say, if we look at the situation of the country where they have come from, and we know that in no time soon is it going to change, can we hasten this process whereby they live with some kind of permanency in the host country? Because these, unfortunately, have been living in limbo for 2-3 decades and have no idea. They don't know anything else. And so, I wonder... it's the responsibility of the state and the organizations who've chosen to be involved. But there can be a hastening of the process. I do not know how, but it seems to me that there could be something that could be done.
You know, what you're saying actually resonates with a statement that the immediate former president made when he assumed his position as president in 2013. He said he was going to end statelessness by the end of his tenure. And we actually saw 4 actually, being given citizenship. Okay, now, that's the president stating and saying, we have a policy, this is what we are going to do. We are going to make sure that these people who lived in our country for this long actually become citizens of this country. Deliberate effort. Now, sometimes we don't highlight these positive things that governments do, or people who've held the position of the president, but this was it. Now, the problem is never what a president does during his tenure, but the continuation of what has been started. Because it is a good thing. If somebody has lived in this country for as long as some of these communities have, it's clear they're not going anywhere. Because if they were going somewhere, they would have gone. And they're here. So how then do you ensure that inclusivity that we speak about is actually enjoyed by them? How then do we set a policy that someone knows that if I've been living in this country for this long, there's a process by which I can actually embark on being a citizen? So it's a clear path, so you know, this is the path I follow if I want to become a citizen of this particular country. Is it really clear? If I want to become a citizen of this country, I'm a citizen, but
as a refugee.
Let's say you were a refugee.
Yes, let's say I was a refugee. Okay, is there a clear path that I know?
You do 1, 2, 3,
and I wait for this long, and I can become a citizen.
I think that's the big question that we need to continue having and engaging the government, because the process of becoming citizenship in Kenya, I think that's well clear in terms of what confirms, because even by just birth, even our birth certificate clearly indicates that birth certificate does not mean it's you are a citizen of the country. But I look at this in more an open conversations, because we have seen a lot of our neighboring countries and the integration of the nations, like East African community, looking at bringing in common approach on how their citizenship or their citizens can enjoy their rights without being limited by the fact the borders and the boundaries. So for me is looking at now how can the countries that are hosting refugees, for example Kenya, and we look at also we have neighboring countries like Uganda is equally also hosting quite a number of refugees. The conversation is, once they have come into the country, how are they being given or have laws or regulations that enables them to participate and support themselves without feeling excluded, without feeling limited. And that is the deliberate efforts that we make with the Pamoja Trust. And I want to say that even within our governance system or structure, where we have the county and the national government, we have, in the Refugee Act, there are some roles that the county government plays. And as we speak, we have a memorandum of understanding with Nairobi City County Government. And we have seen them also opening up and providing opportunities for refugees inclusion. One of them is that refugees now, when they have their refugee ID, they can apply for business permit. That's already a breakthrough. So when they're able to participate and do business within the city, it means they will not need to rely on the government or international community to continue supporting, but give them that opportunity to continue having their livelihood. So in the citizenship, I think then now we really need to unpack that maybe in the government, because it's very
probably
clear
the question is, Boniface,
yes,
as the IRC, have you helped any refugee acquire Kenyan citizenship? Or have you come across somebody who was previously a refugee who's now legally acquired Kenyan citizenship?
Not any I'm aware of as we speak.
Is this because of a lack of a proper law? Because the Constitution, I'm going to read Article 15 is on citizenship by registration.
Yes.
16.2 says, a person who has been lawfully resident in Kenya for a continuous period of at least 7 years and who satisfies the conditions prescribed by an Act of Parliament may apply to be registered as a citizen. So is it that there's an Act of Parliament that then that puts in stringent conditions that then lock out a refugee? Because there are refugees who've been in this country for 30 years plus.
Exactly. Not any that is coming in my mind clearly that we have an Act of Parliament that defines how to apply and become a citizen. Probably I need to make reference to that.
Or is it not your mandate?
For us, our mandate is ideally to support their inclusion, and also work with the government just to ensure that the services that they're supposed to receive, they continue receiving that. And we also just work with the government to support in terms of regulations. And I believe the Refugee Act and the regulations that are being developed currently, which IRC has played a critical role working with the other agencies, may inform some of the decisions on how we can support the refugees to...
You see, your mandate falls right in, because the eventuality, the logical conclusion to this whole process is if there can be a clear path. So when you sensitize the communities who form what we call the refugee, you tell them that you've been in this camp for the last 9 years. There is this process you can follow. And this is what you could do. Or is it something you already do?
Good question, but just to clarify, the mandate to provide citizenship lies with the government.
No, the mandate to inform the people.
To provide support.
Yes, it's support. You see, it's just information. You are not giving them citizenship. You are telling them that it is a possibility that is available to them. Part of the same process that you have, meaning you could be a citizen of this country if you so wish. Some people may be here, but they do not wish to be citizens.
Yes.
Their wish is to go back to their countries.
Yes.
So it won't apply. But for those who would wish, just the knowledge alone, it's something that you could provide, because some of them may not know.
And I think that's why we're going back to the regulations, because the Act already speaks about integration of the refugees, and the integration is trying to find a sustainable solution. And the questions about citizenship by registration also comes in whenever we talk about the regulations, and I know IRC has been key in this process. So after we've gotten the regulations and these specific answers, we can then go back and sensitize the community, because one of the challenges that we also face as institutions that work in the community is we cannot misinform the community. That's also a problem that we may face if in case we give them the wrong information. So we're still guided by the regulations, and we hope that the regulations will create a clear path specifically on that matter.
So currently, as far as you know, there's no clear path.
There's no clear path.
The only thing that we have now is integration on how we can support them, give them business permits like Nairobi County has done, allow them to go to attend schools, attend health facilities, be in business, live in neighborhoods, access financial services, all across the board.
Yes.
Okay. Job opportunities, there's a limit.
Job opportunities, actually, we do have ongoing conversation, because for refugees to work, they are required to have Class M permit, which ideally calls for it's a bit of a process. The employer has to apply, but you see, for an employer to apply that, and there's a Kenyan probably also who have similar skills, they ideally
Then the
consider
job
Kenyan.
permit
So that's another
becomes
bit of
an issue.
technicality.
Anyway, these are interesting conversations to have, and I'd like to have them again and again and again with you. Thank you very much for joining us today. Boniface Odhiambo is the Economic Recovery and Development Coordinator at International Rescue Committee. Irene Kinoti is a Program Officer with Pamoja Trust. We've been having a conversation about the day today. 20th of June is International World Refugee Day.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.